We play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and we are filming here at Warhammer World Studios. They have allowed us to take over their interviewing space, or their casting space, for some interviews with various people associated with Games Workshop. And so I'm very excited for that, and a big thank you to Games Workshop, of course, for allowing us to do this. My first interview is going to be with James Hewitt.
Hello.
So I'm not sure if you're going to recognize that name, but anybody who's a fan of Necromunda or Blood Bowl will probably be like, wait a second, I think I've heard that name before. Because your name would be inside of the actual books for those, is that right?
It would be if names went inside books.
So they don't...
It's invisible. It's printed. Like if you pull the book apart between the pages, it's in there somewhere. Don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah, don't pull it apart. James is not responsible for any destroyed Necromunda and or Blood Bowl books, or your computer screen when you try to tear that off. And so James actually used to work for Games Workshop for a few years, and then he actually now is a freelance game designer. You have your own company, Needy Cat Games. Yes. Got that right, which is good. Always good for an interviewer to get the name right. And you actually do freelance game design and consulting, is that right?
Yeah, so I've actually done a few things still for Games Workshop. I'm still hanging around, as you can see. I'm doing some things at other companies as well. But yeah, generally just having a chance to be a game designer, like for hire, like a privateer on the high seas.
Who exactly would hire you?
Anyone who is either who wants to have a game designed, they've got an idea, they don't know how to actually make it happen, so I can kind of help them out with that. Also, I've had some work from people who have got a rule set they're not quite happy with, and I can go in and fix it up. A lot of what I did when I was here at Games Workshop involved peer review and feedback, and there's a big kind of culture of that here, and so I'm just kind of extending that out into the wider world. So
what is your list of... What's your CV look like for games that I have had a serious part in?
Yeah, sure. So ones that are out and available now. So let's work backwards.
Yeah,
so,
we can't say anything that is not allowed to be said yet.
Exactly. There are snipers trained on me right now. So the one that I can say that hasn't come out yet is Adeptus Titanicus. That's coming out at some point in the future. We've already shown it off at an event. I think it was the Horus Heresy Weekender back in February, which is a reboot of a game from the 80s, which is going to be very exciting.
I'm excited for it, but we have one of our employees, Josh, who's like super excited for it. He just loves everything about it.
It was a real kind of passion project. I got to spend a lot of time on it. We made it as cool as it could be. It's going to be awesome.
We'll talk about that in a second. I do have questions about Adeptus Titanicus. We'll come back to that.
Necromunda, which is currently on pre-release. Whenever this video goes out, it may already be out. I don't know. We'll find out.
So it'll probably go out next week, which is still in the pre-order time.
So people are certainly starting to play the game in shops, play some demos and things. I think you guys are playing some games of it. Yes. It seems to be going pretty well. Before that, Blood Bowl. And then before that, when I was in the specialist games team. Before that, I worked in the main rules team. So the last game I worked on there was Gore Chosen. That was my design. It's kind of a collaborative effort, though, lots of different people, but I did the rules work. Similarly, going backwards, Warhammer Quest Silver Tower and Horus Heresy Betrayal at Calth.
Wow, that's a good list. Now, what about non-Games Workshop games?
But I used to work for Mantic Games. That's how I first found out about you guys. Been kind of following you since, not in a stalkery way, just nice curtains though.
Hey, do you like the new furniture in my house?
It's great, love it. Yeah. But yeah, I was a co-designer on Dread Bowl back in the day for Mantic. So Dread Bowl, Blood Bowl, look out, Guild Bowl, I'm coming for you.
You're just gonna
get the big three. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, get my stamp card completed. And yeah, other than that, that's pretty much that was the only thing I worked on in a main way before I came to Games Workshop. So I came here straight from Mantic, but I worked on a few other games like in the background that they did as well. But
well, that's still a pretty good list, because I know. Now you said Blood Bowl. Are you talking about the latest iteration of Blood Bowl, or were you part of the original design team as well?
Yeah, no. Back when it was previously supported by Games Workshop, I was just a rabid fan. I was actually working in the retail stores at the time, running leagues in my store. But yeah, the new edition was I took the lead on that. Right. I didn't have to do much writing. It was mainly Control-C, Control-V, because we already had the competition rules pack, which was the culmination of the living rule book. It was honed. So
that comes to a question then. Actually, do you mind just pulling forward just a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
I think we keep hitting this backdrop. Oh, no. Here we go. There we go. Perfect. So that comes to the question I had. I remember when Blood Bowl came out.
Yeah.
I heard that Blood Bowl was coming out. I'm like, okay, we better get into Blood Bowl. I've never played it before, so I played the competition rules, or the living rule book, or whichever one it was, and I can't remember exactly. But it was like the kind of the official what everybody played thing.
The CRP, the competition rules pack, was like the final kind of capping off of the living rulebook. So it was the final. This is the current version for about 10 years, I think.
Exactly, and I remember playing it and thinking they're about to re-release this, and I'm kind of worried because this is a solid. I'm going through it because I always find things in games I don't like, and in Blood Bowl, I'm like, I don't really see anything that I would change. And so it was interesting when you came out with that it was like, you know what, this is actually already really good. Let's focus more on the miniatures. Let's focus on repackaging it, kind of getting it back into being our product again rather than out in the community. We'll support it. We'll get the new armies out. So when it comes to Necromunda, now I can say already that we've played it. It has obviously callbacks to original Necromunda, but it's definitely not just a copy and paste job. You had to think almost from scratch, combining a lot of the 8th edition rules kind of mentality, but at the same time bringing back things like initiative, ammo checks. You're even breaking back the really, really old leadership with the cool willpower and intelligence. So what made you decide that we don't just want to use the Necromunda Community Edition, which already has that kind of core following? Why bring it up to date, as opposed to Blood Bowl not being brought up to date, or being made anew, I should say?
Yeah, Necromunda was a big kind of a passion project for the whole Specialist Games team. So mainly myself. So I was the rules writer for the team. Andy Hall was the team manager. We're both big Necromunda fans. He's been playing it, I think, weekly pretty much since it came out in the 90s. He's a bit of a mega fan. It was one of the first games I really heavily got into. I've run countless campaigns over the years. So both of us were like, we love Necromunda. How can we make it the game we really want it to be? And part of that...
I'm going to interrupt you. What do you think of the original game? Because I agree, there's certain... As opposed to Blood Bowl, there are certain things about Necromunda where I'm like, this is clunky, this is not that great. What parts in your mind stood out the most as being, we need to change this to make this the game we want it to be?
Yeah. So I think you can see a lot of the etymology, if you like, the kind of the heritage of Necromunda comes from Warhammer 40,000 Second Edition, which came from Rogue Trader, and there's a lot of things in there which are very 80s. They're a bit aged now, a bit rusty. The turn sequence, the fact that you have your entire gang has a go, then the other player has a go. I think Rick Priestley has gone on record. This is the guy who designed Rogue Trader in the first place. He liked that kind of turn system because he had a chance to go and make a cup of tea in his opponent's turn. He may have been joking, but it's definitely the case that I'm not a big fan of downtime in games. Right. I like it that you can kind of always be involved in some way, and so the big criticism I had almost with the old Necromunda was that just the core mechanics felt a bit slow and clunky. The campaign system was great. I loved that. There were a few things where you felt maybe it would be nice to have a bit more clarity on what this all means in context of the narrative. You know, what are the gangs actually doing when they win a game? You know, how is their territory expanding? And that's some stuff we've addressed in the new edition. But yeah, so it was really a chance to kind of mash together some of those, you know, narrative sensibilities of the old game, update them, and put a new kind of engine under the hood.
So a big part of what you're saying there is just basically the turn priority sequence, that whole, you know, you roll for priority and then you alternate activate. That was a big part of what you wanted it to do. Another thing that I appreciated the rules changes is the combat system, because the old combat system, I liked the old combat system because it felt very role-playing game-like, where it's like, you know, you're comparing your stats rather than one person hitting the other. And I enjoyed that, but there was a certain level of, you better really get to know this rule, because otherwise you're going to be spending half the day just reading it every time you go to do it. And it could take a long time. Once you had like 5 people in a combat, it's like, okay, let's do this one, now let's do this one, now let's do this one, now let's do this one, let's do this one, let's do this one.
A big kind of shift in game design generally. This is a whole thing, a conversation I could have, but generally between then and now, people are less willing to look things up in a book mid-game. You want to have the information there in front of you that you can play it. And I think part of it is that gaming's become more accessible. Mm-hmm. So you haven't got to be quite as into the minutiae of the rules to be playing a game. Right. And so to make that, you know, make it accessible to newer players and people that just want to get on and play the game, not read a 300-page manual, it's very important to have everything out in front of you. And so not having charts to look up, all that kind of thing is really important.
No, I definitely agree. It's interesting because I've seen the same thing kind of happen in the video game world where, and some people complain about it, and I get why they complain about it, because they're the ones that are super familiar with the complex system. Like, I remember the very first time I played Elder Scrolls Morrowind, I was like, what is going on? I have no idea how any of this is working. They're putting me through a character creation process that I have no idea what it means, and I left it. And I came back a few months later, I'm like, I'll give it another crack at it. And I tried it again, I forced myself to learn it, and then it became one of my favorite games. And then people started complaining that, you know, Oblivion comes out, Skyrim come out, and they kind of dumb down that system. And I agreed. I'm like, yeah, I wish it was like that, except the speech system. That was awful.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, but I get it. I get why he did it, because I remember abandoning the game. Like, I almost didn't get into it. It was more out of sheer boredom one day that I actually picked it up. And so I can see the same thing happening in war games, where people are turning to more simplified rules, and I can see some of the veterans or old-timers that are just lamenting that fact. Yeah. But at the same time, having played games a long time, role-playing games, I appreciate both sides. I appreciate a complex game, but I also really appreciate sometimes just being able to quickly learn the rules of a game and then get right into it. And especially as a person covering games, it's laborious. I don't find enjoyment out of learning a game. Any game, I don't like learning. So it's a nice surprise when you can pick it up in just a game or two. So I really do appreciate that. But I can see at the same time why other people might not like that. They prefer their old clunky attack system. They prefer whatever the way it was before. It was perfect the way it was. But I still think that having played it, it kind of hits it right. Now, I haven't tried the campaign system yet, so I can't speak to that. Yeah. But it feels like the core rules seem to work pretty well.
The aim was, even though we're updating the way the rules work, we wanted to keep the feel of the game. And that, I think that goes throughout. Everything we've done with Necromunda is, even though when you first look at, read the rules, you might think this is different. If you watch a game being played, you might kind of think, oh, this is kind of the same game. And I think hopefully, as you've played it yourself, it feels kind of Necromunda-ish, which is, good.
I think a big part of that's the models too, right? Like, if I was playing with any other models, then you'd feel like you're playing a different game. So, in the end, the setting has a huge influence. Obviously, game mechanics are very important. I don't want to try to classify how important compared to models or terrain. But to me, they are very important to get right. But at the same time, they're almost secondary to the setting. Playing 40K, the game hasn't always been as tight as it can be, but I love the setting, and that makes up for it. And the 8th edition has been a lot better, but even then, I find all sorts of things in it that I don't like. But I still love the game, because no other game allows you to throw down that many science fiction models and play on this gorgeous terrain and all of that. Most of the other ones are smaller scale because they need to be. So no, I can appreciate that a lot. Okay, so Necromunda. Probably currently on pre-order. If not, it's already out. You'll know. Just go check it out. Just do a Google search for Necromunda and you'll see it. So I want to talk a bit about Adeptus Titanicus. Ooh, yeah. Sure. And so you're involved in that. Now, I personally have never played Epic, just because of the restrictions of what we played based on popularity and stuff. I've never gotten into it. We've gotten into Battlefleet Gothic, Blood Bowl, Necromunda, all that kind of stuff, but not yet Epic. So for the Epic players out there who are probably sweating right now, they're like, what have you done? What have you done? How can you speak to, now that we've had a conversation of how Blood Bowl went and how Necromunda went, how would you compare Adeptus Titanicus's rewrite to those two?
Yeah, sure. So to give some context for anyone who doesn't know, Epic as a range started with a game called Adeptus Titanicus back in '87, I want to say, mid-'80s. And it was a game where the Horus Heresy came from. You had two forces of plastic titans, and I think it was just Warlord Titans that were in there in the box. Plastic multi-part kits, and the game was all about big titans fighting. Then an expansion came out for it, Space Marine, which introduced infantry. So you had Space Marines and Titans in the Horus Heresy setting.
And this is all at what scale again? Is 5 or 8 millimeters?
Wibbly small scale. The actual scale depends on whether you're looking at infantry vehicles or Titans, which is a thing we've addressed in the new edition. But because of limitations on casting and how big models could feasibly be back then, a Titan was maybe half the size it should have been for the scale.
What scale would you shoot for to be then?
So we have gone for roughly 8mm scale. So a Space Marine is about 8mm. Which is it's small enough that you can differentiate different marks of armor, but big enough that you can do that, but small enough that you can still make a Titan a decent size. So a Warlord is about the size of maybe a Dreadnought, a little bit larger than that perhaps, which is a really nice scale. It means Knights are at Terminator size, and you just want to hold them and paint them. Oh, they're lovely. But yeah, so anyway, so that was Titanicus, was followed by Space Marine, which then was iterated several times into different editions of Epic, which became a game all about massed battles between infantry, huge swathes of vehicles, Titans thrown in. Now, what we haven't done with the new game, we haven't remade Epic, we've remade Titanicus. So we are focusing on nothing smaller than a knight. So Warlord Titans, Reaver Titans, Warhounds, and Knights. That's kind of the main core of the game. More things will come out as time goes by. But yeah, there was a big discussion about, do we go full epic? Do we look at infantry and things? The problem is the 40k range is so massive now. Even if you just look at the Horus Heresy range, to recreate all of that in 8mm scale would be a massive job. And even if you have files, a lot of the models are sculpted digitally now. And even if you take the file and just shrink it down, you still have to do a lot of work. Rescaling, redetailing. I think the Warlord Titan was a digital file, which was brought down to size, and it still took about 3 months, I think, after that to retool it. But anyway, so what we've done is we've gone back and created a game from scratch. It's a brand new rule set, which incorporates what we think are the best elements of the previous versions of the game. And I won't lie, I looked at other things. I looked at Mech Warrior, I looked at Heavy Gear, anything that involves big robots fighting. And the system it's fun. What I'm really proud of is you can play a game with one Warlord Titan aside, and it's still interesting. It's still a game
there's enough detail that you're like disabling parts and you have to manage what they can do and all of that. So it's not just like, well, just run until you run out of your 20 hit points kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that good game design is about decisions, offering the player decisions on what they're going to do in their turn. And so in here, you're managing your power levels, so how hot your reactor's running. You're picking the way your maneuvering works is a whole kind of sub game in itself. It's very detailed, but at the same time, it's still quite approachable. It's still quite a game that, again, anyone kind of get into. All the information is presented. You have like a card for each Titan, which has all of its stats on it. There's very little. I think there's no counters on the board itself. Everything is off to one side, so it looks very nice, very visual. And I can't wait for it to come out and people to see it.
What size table will be played on?
So it defaults to a 4x4.
Oh, still a 4x4.
Yeah, the reason being, we thought most people have access to a 6x4. Making it a 4x4 means you always have that space for all your Titan cards and that kind of thing. We didn't want to have a thing where you have to have your 6x4 plus an additional side table. Because it just means that it's more accessible again to gamers. You can play it on a smaller area, and you can go up to a 6x4 quite happily if you want to. The general kind of force size is 5 Titans of whichever size you want. So it could be 5 Warlords, it could be 5 Warhounds, plus maybe some Knights as a skirmishing force around that. So it's one that's going to be quite easy to get into, not a huge force to paint, kind of like Blood Bowl or Necromunda, but has a lot of depth to it.
Now, this point, you might not be able to answer this, and that's fine. You talked about how you're not recreating Epic of this. Are there plans in motion to perhaps expand there, or is it kind of wait and see how this does to choose that, or is it I can't say?
So what I'll say what we've said at a few shows and things in the past. We looked at it, and what we've done is we've made sure the rules won't break if we add infantry. So one of the problems that Titanicus, the first edition, had was the rule for void shields. A void shield, you had a certain number of void shields, and whenever you took a hit, you lost a void shield. Space Marine came in and you had guys with las guns taking down void shields off Titans because one hit, We've made sure that the rules are fully written. We've kind of tested out some very rudimentary infantry and vehicle rules. The space is there. Currently there are no plans as far as I'm aware. I've not been there for 6 months, so who knows. But I think the plan is initially focus on the big, cool Titans and things and let it go from there. Because partially, massive sweeping battles of that scale, you can kind of do them in 40k now, Back when Epic was first a thing, you would never have a battle that size in 40k. But now with the prevalence of plastic miniatures and the fact the 8th edition rules are so quick, you kind of can do that. So I imagine it'll be a case of wait and see.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed either way, because you can kind of see it that way, that you can play Epic at the large scales, and then you're like, okay, now we're going to do a smaller game, we play 40k, and then we're going to really get even further in and play some Kill Team or even down to Necromunda kind of scale things, and that can be really interesting. Well, that's exciting. I'm not quite sure when they haven't released any information about even like a broad idea, like coming 2018 or anything.
No, it was we first mentioned it at Warhammer Fest last year, 2016, and then the Horus Heresy weekend we ran a game of it.
So it's that far along then?
Oh, the rules have been finished for a long time, but we ran a game in 40k scale, so we got a huge cloth out on the floor, made some big buildings. People brought their Titans along. We played a game. There are various blogs. If you search Horus Heresy Weekend Titanicus game, you can read quite a lot about the rules. But it's now been it got pushed back for actually a good reason. The decision was originally made to make the Titans in resin, they've now moved to plastic, which is much cooler, makes it much easier to get into, but that takes time and retooling. So some point in the future.
Between now and 2050. Can you confirm before 2050?
I don't want to be held to that, so...
Well, that's a little ominous, isn't it? Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm excited for that. Necromunda is great. I've tried it. I'm excited for Adeptus Titanicus. I love different ways to play within the same IP. So that all is very exciting. So the last thing I want to talk about is let's step back a bit outside of Games Workshop stuff. Talk about Needy Cat Games. Yeah. How do you currently function with that? Like, how would somebody get a hold of you, and like, what are they looking at for how far backlogged you are? Like, if they're thinking about it, do it now because you got a 6-month backlog, or it's like, no, I could probably get it next week if it's something small. What scale are you working at right now?
Best way to contact me or find out what I do generally, get more detail, is needycatgames.com. Which I'm guessing.
I'll try to remember to put that in the description.
Yeah, do one of those things. There's a box, on the somewhere or down.
Rob at it here. If it's not here, it's Rob's fault.
But yeah, Needy Cat Games. That's kind of got a list of what I can do. And currently, I'm free from February onwards, I think, currently. There's some things penciled in, but if people have urgent jobs, they really want to get a game ticking that isn't currently, speak to me and I'll do what I can. Even a couple of days can really help sometimes.
Because at the very least, you could do some consulting. You don't have to necessarily be involved in all the writing.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I've done some stuff for a couple of games recently where they've been like, oh, we're going to Kickstarter in a week, and we just want to make sure it's all tightened up. They want to put a PDF of the rules out, and I can go through and, just give some detailed feedback, make sure it's looking as good as it can. Mm-hmm. And actually, sometimes just having anyone read through the rules is a good thing. But the thing that I bring to it is I've got a fair bit of experience, as I say, working in a rules design team, giving daily feedback back and forth. I know what kind of things to look for, what kind of ambiguous rules might come up, the kind of regular challenges that rulebooks face, and hopefully I can help people just fix that.
That's awesome. That's great. So Needy Cat Designs, or needycatgames.com. Yeah. I got it in the end.
That's an extra domain for me to buy. I'll have to get that domain as well.
Oh, there you go. Now I had to buy that one. Just have it redirect. But thank you so much.
Great stuff.
It's been a pleasure. Very much looking forward to Necromunda and Adeptus Titanicus coming 2050.
Or later.
Or later. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you go check out needycatgames.com. Thank you again, James. Happy wargaming.